Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere hot, really hot. You're walking across a sun-bleached courtyard in ancient Persia. It's high noon. The stone beneath your feet is warm enough to fry lentils, and the air thick and dry shimmers in the distance. You blink and squint, pulling your robe tighter, even though it doesn't help much. Then, just when the heat feels unbearable, you step beneath a towering clay archway, and something miraculous happens. A breeze. A cool, silent breath of air brushes against your skin. You pause. It's not coming from a fan, not from a fountain, and definitely not from any enchanted genie in a lamp scenario. It's just wind. Perfectly aimed, naturally chilled, and utterly soothing. What you're feeling isn't magic. It's designed specifically, one of the cleverest forms of passive air conditioning humanity has ever invented. Welcome to the world of the badger or Persian windcatcher. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere warm, or even cooler than Yazd, in mid-July, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge farther into the ancient Persian city. The light changes darker now beneath the maze-like alleys that cut between mud brick homes. This place isn't built randomly. Every shadow, every turn, every sloped roof knows exactly what it's doing. And as you squint up at the skyline, you see them towers open on one side like stone chimneys frozen in mid-sigh. They're everywhere, some square, some rounded a few, even octagonal. These are not minarets or chimneys. These are windcatchers. Passive, sculptural, and oddly beautiful. Like sails turned to the sky, waiting for wind instead of water. Now you may be wondering, wasn't the desert unbearable without electricity? Oh, absolutely. If you're thinking you could have survived ancient Persian summer in sandals and good intentions, let's be honest, you probably wouldn't have lasted a week. But the people here, they thrived. Not just endured, but actually created cities that felt, well, livable, even elegant. They didn't rely on fans, ice machines, or air conditioning units belching freon into the atmosphere. Instead, they worked with nature using heat against itself. And here's the wild part. The hotter it got outside, the better these structures worked. Historians still argue whether the earliest windcatchers were purely functional or spiritual as well. Some believe they symbolized a divine respect for air and balance, drawing on Zoroastrian principles that elevated natural elements. Others suggest they began simply as a way to ventilate storage rooms and then evolved slowly, gracefully into full-blown architectural art. The earliest versions probably appeared sometime before the 5th century BCE, though you'll find no dramatic unveiling moment, no single name attached, no marble dedication. It was a collective invention passed along through trial, error, and whispers on the breeze. As you wander deeper into the city, a merchant calls out from under a striped awning offering you melon slices chilled in clay pots. A detail like that might seem minor until you remember the average temperature outside hovers around 100 degrees Centigrade, 38 degrees Celsius, and yet those slices are cold. How? It all comes back to wind. The badger above the house where that melon came from probably caught a high-altitude draft, directed it down into a vertical shaft, and either dropped it straight into a living space or passed it first over an underground water channel. The cool air would displace the hot, and the pressure difference would pull warmth up and out. All this with no moving parts. It's like standing inside a giant, slow-breathing animal that inhales heat and exhales comfort. And it's quiet. No buzzing, no humming. Just you and the architecture conspiring to keep you from melting. A fringe theory, one that some Iranian folklorists love to repeat, says that certain windcatchers were also used to eavesdrop. Their hollows supposedly carried whispers from neighboring rooftops. Is it true? No one can prove it. But as you pause beneath one and hear the soft, echoing rustle of the wind, you think maybe it could be. As night begins to fall, a boy walks by carrying a lantern and a water jug. He glances up at a particularly tall badger, nods in respect, and continues into an alley. You follow at a slow pace, your sandals brushing against gravel, your skin still tingling with that faint, delicious cool. Some of the towers are simple, others intricate with interior flues, divided into multiple vertical shafts. Some direct wind down, others pull hot air up. The materials vary to mud brick, adobe, sometimes even plaster or glazed tile. But they all share one idea: let nature in. Wisely. And here's the kicker: modern architects still study these things. Universities run fluid dynamics simulations, trying to recreate them in 3D modeling software. Engineers scratch their heads, wondering how the ancients achieved such consistent interior temps, often 15 to 20 degrees cooler than the surrounding desert, using nothing but geometry and gravity. Of course not. Every Persian home had one. Like today's solar panels or backyard saunas, windcatchers were easier to install if you had a bit of wealth. But their use spread far and wide, not only in Persia, but in North Africa, India, and parts of the Levant. You'll see their fingerprints in the wind towers of Dubai, and even echoes in early Spanish courtyard houses. Still no place embraced them quite like Persia. And you're just getting started. You're standing in the heart of Yazd. It's not the kind of place your weather app would recommend for a leisurely stroll in July. Temperatures regularly flirt with 110-degree blinds. The sunlight bounces off pale mud brick walls like a personal insult, and even the pigeons look like they've given up. But somehow you're not sweating. In fact, there's a gentle, unexpected breeze brushing your face. It's coming from above. Look up. There it is, a badger. Or, as modern architects have started to lovingly call them, Persian windcatchers. These are no ordinary rooftop flourishes. They're tall, tower-like structures, carved with elegant vertical slits, some squared, others arched, or even octagonal. They rise from the flat roofs of Yazd like ancient weather vanes, designed not to spin, but to breathe. Built from the same sun-dried mud brick as the homes below, they don't shout for attention. They just work. You'd think a hollow tower wouldn't do much in a land where the wind often comes with a side of sand, but that's where you'd be wrong. These towers don't just invite air, they select it, cool it, and usher it inside like a butler with a climate-control degree. Most traditional Yazdi homes were built with their badgir placed strategically to face the prevailing desert winds north, usually. But the real trick was that even when the wind wasn't blowing, the design could still create airflow by exploiting temperature differences between sunlit and shaded zones. Warm air rises, cool air sinks, and the Persians knew it centuries before your local HVAC technician. In Yazid's old town, still remarkably preserved, you walk down a narrow, winding alley where walls rise tall on either side, casting much-needed shade. But overhead, above the skyline of mud brick domes and enclosed courtyards, the badgirs rise like silent sentinels. Some are squat and simple, others extravagantly tall, with multiple channels designed to catch wind from more than one direction. And you know what some of these towers are over 600 years old, and still functioning. Historians still argue whether the very first windcatchers appeared in Persia or if they were an invention brought from ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. What we do know is that by the 9th century, CE Persian engineers had mastered their use not just for homes, but for mosques, caravanserais, and even ice houses. Yes, windcatchers helped make ice in the desert. But let's not skip ahead too soon. The secret to Yazid's survival isn't just the badgers, it's how the entire city works together. Streets are built with a purpose often curved to reduce dust and funnel the breeze. Homes are designed inward with central courtyards that trap cooler air-shaded pools that gently evaporate water into the surrounding rooms, and thick walls that absorb the day's heat and release it slowly overnight. It's all part of an elegantly orchestrated performance, where the architecture is the conductor and the desert heat, just another musician. And then there's that smell. Jasmine, pomegranate blossoms, the faint dust of centuries. It's not a stretch to say that even the air in Yazd was curated. Some badgers pulled their breeze directly over shallow basins of rosewater before it flowed into living quarters. You'd breathe in, and instead of scorched air and sweat, you'd get a faint floral note and a noticeable drop in temperature. It's no wonder that Yazd earned the title of the City of Windcatchers. With over 3,000 of them dotting the skyline at one point, it was like a desert forest of passive coolers, each one humming softly in the background. Today, fewer remain functional, but restorers and eco-architects are working to revive them, giving new life to ancient tech that somehow still beats most modern solutions. And here's something a little quirky, the locals say, that you can judge a family's historical wealth by the height of their windcatcher. Taller meant better airflow and better bragging rights, because in a place like Yazd, staying cool was status. It's getting late now. The sun slips lower, casting golden light along the ridges of the windcatchers above. You duck through a small wooden doorway into a home from the Qajar period. Inside, the air is cooler. There's no electric fan, no AC unit humming in the corner, just the tower above whispering down a steady stream of relief. And outside, the wind still warm but softened rustles through the alleyways of a city that was never meant to conquer the desert, only to live with it. You pause at the base of a tall tower, your neck craned to follow its strange vertical geometry. It looks a bit like a chimney, except it's not pumping anything out, it's drawing something in. Welcome to the core of Persian cooling magic, the Badgir. You step through a shaded doorway and into a wide, tiled courtyard. The sunlight here is filtered through wooden latticework, and the air feels different. Not cool exactly, but definitely not scorching like outside. A little whisper of breeze brushes your arm. That's the tower doing its job, and it's been doing it since long before thermostats and Freon. The Badger, or windcatcher, is a marvel of passive design. No motors, no wires, no fan blades, just clever geometry and physics. At its simplest, it's a vertical shaft attached to the roof of a building with slits or open arches facing the prevailing winds. The idea: let the wind do what it naturally does, move, and make it work for you. When wind hits the tower, it flows down the shaft into the rooms below. If there's a qanat, a deep, cool underground water channel beneath the floor, the moving air passes over it, cooling as it goes. That's when it becomes less like a warm sigh and more like a refreshing exhale. The breeze spills out into the living space, carrying moisture comfort and a slight scent of damp earth. Not bad for a system developed before most people had figured out how to boil water efficiently. But here's the twist. Badgers also work without wind. in still air, or even in reverse. That's right, some badgers can create airflow by leveraging differences in air temperature and pressure. When hot air rises inside the building, it escapes through the tower, sucking cooler air in from below. It's the same principle as that open window trick your grandma swore by. Historians still argue whether the first true windcatchers emerged in the Persian plateau or further south in Egypt. The evidence is murky. Brick foundations crumble. Wood decays and climate change has reshaped entire landscapes. But one thing's clear: Persia embraced the windcatcher with architectural devotion. You walk into a receiving room where tall ceilings and thick walls keep the sun's aggression outside. Above you, the shaft opens into the room through a vent, sometimes screened, sometimes open. Some houses even had adjustable flaps, letting residents tune their wind like a lazy afternoon playlist. Now, look closely. Some towers are divided into 4 vertical shafts, each facing a cardinal direction. That's no accident. If the wind isn't coming from the north today, it might be coming from the west. These towers played the wind like a patient chess master, always one move ahead of the heat. And then there's the decorative flourish, scalloped vents, carved tiles, painted trim. Sure, it's functional, but it's also elegant. Like cooling your lemonade with a handcrafted ice cube. One particularly quirky bit. In some homes, the shaft's interior was coated with natural resins or polished plaster, not just for airflow, but to deter birds, insects, and the occasional curious cat. Persian homeowners were stylish and practical. As the day wears on, the tower continues its gentle breathing. You feel it most clearly when you pass from the sunlit courtyard back into a shaded hallway. That slight whoosh is the pulse of passive design. It's not the dramatic blast of modern AC. It's subtle, almost contemplative, like the building is exhaling just for you. And while we're being honest, not every badger worked perfectly. Poor design, bad placement, or a blocked shaft could turn your windcatcher into a glorified chimney. There were definitely a few early adopter mistakes. Imagine building a wind tower only to realize it's perfectly aligned with your neighbor's laundry smoke. Still, the idea endured for centuries. Some towns became known for their distinctive wind-catcher silhouettes, rising like stone sails over rooftops. Tourists might not call them charming, but in the Persian heat, charm had nothing on shade. So now you've seen how a hole in a roof became a symbol of climate-savvy brilliance, and how ancient architects turned air itself into a design element. You step back outside, squinting at the sky, and let the breeze, guided by centuries of trial and error, brush your cheek again. You descend beneath the sun-baked courtyards of a Persian estate, not into a dungeon, not into storage, but into the lungs of the house. It's silent, except for the drip, drip, drip of water, echoing off walls carved from stone and clay. This is the world of qanats, underground water channels that not only kept ancient cities alive, but made staying cool in a desert a daily possibility. You wouldn't have seen them walking around. That was the point. These gently sloped tunnels ran for miles beneath the dry crust of the earth, channeling water from distant mountain springs all the way to villages, farms, and palaces. Dug with terrifying precision, no modern levels, no GPS, just human labor geometry, and hope qanats worked like a gravity-fed air conditioner with a splash of magic. You walk deeper past a narrow shaft that opens upward, one of many vertical access points that let workers enter clean and maintain the tunnel. But these shafts did something else. They acted like chimneys, letting rising hot air out while drawing cooler air into the tunnel. That air, now chilled by stone water, and shadow could be routed through the palace. And guess what's often perched right on top of those vertical shafts? You got it, a badger, that famous windcatcher. This isn't two systems. This is one beautiful ancient HVAC network, before duct tape was even a dream. Now imagine lying above this network during a scorching August afternoon. The floor beneath you is cold to the touch. A faint breeze tickles your hair. You hear water moving, always water, and the sound lulls you into something between sleep and dream. This wasn't luxury. This was survival engineered into the architecture. And yes, it's wildly more efficient than your window unit that wheezes once July hits. Here's a fun fringe detail. In some fancier estates, the water from the qanat was led into an indoor house, a shallow reflecting pool right in the center of a living space. These pools weren't just pretty. The movement of air across them cooled the rooms further, and guests would sit around them sipping tea, the scent of jasmine wafting up. Talk about a vibe. And if someone dropped a bit of saffron into the water to give it color and a light aroma, well, let's just say the ancient Persians were not minimalists. Historians still argue whether these combined systems were developed in tandem or layered over centuries' trial and error, folded into tradition. Did the qanats inspire the rise of the windcatcher? Or did people start building above the qanats to take advantage of them? Like trying to untangle whether the chicken or the egg came first. Except in this case, both make your room cooler, so maybe it doesn't matter. If you were a child growing up in Yazd or Kerman, this subterranean magic wasn't so magical. It was just home. You might have been sent down into a qanat tunnel with a small lamp and a bucket told to clear out silt or check for snakes. Not ideal bedtime story material, but incredibly important. And unlike Rome's aqueducts, which parade across the countryside in stone arches, Persian qanats whisper beneath the earth, quiet and cool and enduring. A common proverb from the region says, "He who controls the qanat controls the city." And that's not metaphor. In many towns, disputes over water rights turned ugly. Entire dynasties rose and fell based on who had permission to tap into which underground channel. You'd think something so hidden would be safe, but sabotage was real. A sneaky blockage upstream, and the cool air and clean water of your estate dried up like spilled tea on a sunlit tile. Still, despite the politics, the technology itself was a quiet miracle. The tunnels lined with special clay and sometimes reinforced with stone resisted collapse even after centuries. Some are still functioning today. Imagine that. Your smart home's air filter breaks in a month, and this system, it's been humming under the desert for over 2,500 years. So as you sit now in this imagined room, stone beneath you, clay walls rising around the faintest draft curling across your cheek, let yourself relax into the rhythm of ancient water. The Persians didn't conquer the desert. They listened to it. They built with it. And in doing so, they found cold in the most unexpected places. You slow your steps as you move through a shaded courtyard. The walls rise high and clay-colored around you, each one made of sun-baked mud brick, modest in material, but brilliant in effect. The air is cooler here, noticeably so. The heat hasn't disappeared, not exactly, it's just softened. Like someone has taken the sharp edge off the sun. You exhale, surprised by the temperature shift, and only then do you notice the garden. It's not big. A square of lushness tucked at the center of the house. 4 channels of water crisscross it in an exact geometric pattern, dividing flower beds of bright desert blooms, pale pink hollyhocks, yellow marigolds, and the all-important rose. You pause beside a low shrub that smells faintly like heaven and dusty sugar. This, you realize, is no random courtyard. It's a Persian paradise garden, a Chahar Bagh, a small intentional miracle of scent, shade, and silence. And it works like a charm. Above you, the badger catches the wind like a vertical sail. But this wind has passed over roses, through fountains past shadows. That's part of the genius. See, Persians didn't just want cool air, they wanted pleasant air. The kind that drifts in with a hint of rose water and lingers without snapping the tapestries off their hooks. The air moves slower here, more deliberately. Not because the wind's tired, but because it's being filtered. The mud brick walls are thick, so thick that by the time outside air passes through them, it's dropped several degrees. One early Islamic scholar described walking through such homes as like being wrapped in soft cloth, soaked in mountain water. Scholars debate which city he meant, maybe Yazd, maybe Shiraz, but that image, hard to argue with. Mud brick, for the record, is wildly underrated. It breathes, it insulates, it's absurdly cheap, and it doesn't care about modern aesthetic rules. It was also, let's be honest, mixed by hand with a whole lot of straw and other things you might not want to think about before bed. But hey, it worked. Even ancient builders knew a little organic matter helps your wall exhale. There's another thing you notice while lounging by this garden. Everything is low. The seating, the tables, the fountains. That's not a design quirk. It's because cool air sinks. In Persia, you live close to the floor, not for minimalism, but for comfort. Which means yes, you are about one woven cushion away from living like a medieval noble. Oh, and don't be surprised if someone brings you a brass tray of melon slices and iced sherbet. Because yes, the Persians had those too. Their chilled treats came courtesy of yakchals, those dome-shaped ice pits dug into the earth, sometimes shaded by their own mini windcatchers. You'll get to crawl into one later, don't worry. Right now, you lie back against a cotton pillow and watch as a gentle wind flutters the hanging curtain at the archway. It doesn't slam, it doesn't rip it loose, just brushes it softly like a cat asking for attention, but not really needing it. Did you catch that hint of orange blossom? No, you're not hallucinating. It's a trick ancient engineers would be proud of. They often planted fragrant trees, myrtle, citrus, rose on the windward side of a property. That way, the air entering the badger had already made a quick pass through perfume. No scented candles required. It was like nature's own HVAC fragrance setting. Historians still argue whether the placement of scent plants followed religious codes or just good taste. Either way, the result was the same breezes that didn't just cool you, they calmed you. And calm was key. In a world with no thermostats, no ceiling fans, and definitely no iced lattes, your mental state depended on architecture. You couldn't just go inside to escape the heat. Inside was the heat, unless you built a home that understood airflow, like a camel understands thirst. And that's exactly what these houses did. They whispered, "Don't fight the desert," invited in, slowly, with flowers and tea. Some evenings, families would gather in the courtyard just before sundown. A samovar hissed gently in the corner. The children's laughter echoed off the cooling brick. Someone tuned a santur plucking lullabies from a trapezoidal zither, while the day's final heat slipped away. And above it all, that wind catcher hummed barely audible like a long exhale from the earth itself. So next time your AC wheezes and you grumble about electric bills, remember this: over 1,000 years ago, someone figured out how to turn hot wind into scented breeze using mud roses and geometry. That's not just architecture, that's poetry. You've now settled into the Persian summer evening, where the heat clings like a silk robe and everything moves slower. You're in the heart of a traditional Persian home somewhere near Yazd, and tonight's challenge is simple sleep without melting. The room you're in isn't random. It's not just any chamber tucked inside the thick mud brick walls. It's the Tabastan Neshin, the summer room. A space designed to harness the evening breeze, cool your skin, and lull you into restful oblivion. You lie on a low bed with woven reed mats stretched beneath you. No springs, no mattress, but the floor underneath. It's not just packed dirt. It's been carefully layered over a qanat channel running beneath the house water, moving slowly, almost meditatively, cooling the earth just enough that you can feel the temperature difference if you press your palm to the floor. Above you, the windcatcher, a tall rectangular shaft, its mouth turned precisely into the prevailing wind. The air isn't forceful, just a gentle sigh slipping down the passage, brushing your forehead like the breath of someone telling you a secret. This, you realize, is not just a room. It's a system. Everything from the bricks to the breeze has been orchestrated for one purpose: surviving the Persian summer without losing your mind. And here's the fun part. This wasn't their main bedroom. Persians had different rooms for different seasons. In winter, they'd move to a Zemistan Neshin, a low-ceilinged, cozy spot, often centered around a brazier. But when summer hit, everyone rotated. Furniture, bedding, family arguments, you name it. Scholars even suggest that part of the daily routine involved shifting the entire domestic rhythm based on sunlight angles and breeze patterns. Historians still argue whether this seasonal migration of sleeping quarters was entirely architectural or partially spiritual. Some believe it reflected ancient ideas about health, air quality, and bodily balance, the kind of thing medieval medicine loved to obsess over. Warm air rising, cool air sinking, the importance of facing north versus south. It wasn't just folklore. It was the HVAC philosophy of the time. But let's not pretend this was all science. There was plenty of drama, too. Kids bickering over who got the corner closest to the breeze. Grandmothers yelling at sons to plug the cracks in the bad gear shaft because a djinn might slip through at night. You know, typical domestic chaos, Persian style. And let's talk about the furniture, or lack thereof. If you're expecting a 4-poster canopy bed and a ceiling fan, forget it. This was a world of lightweight cotton bedding that could be shaken out and moved in under a minute. The few pieces of furniture were portable, multi-purpose, and very often used for midday naps, just as much as nighttime rest. As you drift toward sleep, your ears begin to pick up on it, the hush of the wind slipping through the plaster tunnel. You almost miss it at first, but then it becomes unmistakable. A sound like paper, rustling like a whisper from 1,000 years ago. That's the sound Persian families counted on to fall asleep. That, and the creak of the reed ceiling above, and maybe a goat bleating down the alley like it's filing a complaint about the heat. There's a small oil lamp burning near the doorway. It casts shadows that stretch across the walls, dancing slowly. You recognize the rhythm now: wind, shadow, breath. Repeat. And here's something a little strange historians have found: writings that suggest Persians not only designed for airflow, but listen to it. The orientation of the house, the layout of the courtyard, the shape of the window grills, all of it created variations in how wind moved and sounded. Some upper-class homes even placed thin reeds or flaps inside the windcatcher to make musical tones. That's right. They turned their air conditioning into a soundtrack. Imagine falling asleep every night to a naturally tuned hum specific to your home's architecture. You didn't just live in a building, you lived in an instrument. Of course not. everyone got this kind of breezy luxury. The richer the family, the taller the badger. Taller towers meant higher access to clean, cooler air and less dust. Poorer families had smaller towers, or none at all, relying more on open courtyards, wet cloths over windows, and nighttime rooftop sleeping. And yes, rooftop sleeping was a whole thing, blankets dragged upstairs, kids chasing stars, and grumpy uncles getting whacked with sandals when they snored too loud. You picture it now. A summer night. Families fanned out across rooftops like laundry. Someone tells a long story under the moon. Someone else falls asleep in the middle of a sentence. And somewhere always, wind hums through a tower, soft and ancient. The mud brick of the walls absorbs the sun's heat all day and slowly releases it at night. But in this carefully designed room, most of that heat drifts harmlessly upward. The thick walls and narrow windows mean the night stays gentle. It's not cold, but it's manageable. You finally close your eyes. You're not alone. You're joined by generations, merchants, poets, bakers, mothers, children, who all learned to sleep through 110 deprivative days by building homes that did half the work for them. And even now in the 21st century, architects are circling back to this: passive cooling, sustainable airflow, relearning what Persia already knew 2,000 years ago. Sometimes the best way to beat the heat is just to let the wind in. You're still in the golden haze of the Persian desert, the sun beginning its slow arc downward, but the heat hasn't budged. The kind that seeps into your bones, no matter how much shade you find. So now you wander into something truly magical, a building that stores ice. Ice, in the middle of Iran, in the year 1200 or so. No freezer, no electricity, no fan, not even a polite breeze. And yet, it's cool in here. You reach out and touch a stack of what looks like compacted snow in the corner. It doesn't melt on contact. Your brain does, though. What you've just entered is called a yakhchal, literally an ice pit. It's part architecture, part witchcraft, and part brilliant thermal science. The outside looks like a giant beehive crossed with a spaceship, round conical, made of thick adobe, and built with a small opening up top and a deep cavity below. It's shaped to trap cold air and push hot air up and out, while thick insulated walls keep the interior cool, even during the height of summer. Ancient Persian engineers weren't just making things cooler, they were manufacturing the impossible. But how do you make ice in a desert in the first place? You wait until night. That's the trick. Persian nights, especially in the high plateau regions, drop to near freezing. It's this vast difference between day and night, sometimes more than 30 degrees Fahrenheit, that they hacked like pro gamers. Shallow pools of water were laid outside the yakhchal in long rectangular trays. These would freeze overnight thanks to radiation cooling, the same phenomenon that gives frost to rooftops. Before sunrise, workers would collect the thin layers of ice, break them up, and shovel them down into the yakhchal's belly. And it wasn't just for drinks, though. Sipping cool rosewater on a July afternoon sounds dreamy. The ice was used to preserve food, chill medicines, and, believe it or not, keep guests impressed. Because yes, just like today, having dessert with a snowflake on top was a sign of class. You weren't just a host. You were the host. Now, pair the yakhchal with windcatchers, those badgers you remember, and you've got yourself an ancient HVAC symphony. Windcatchers pulled down the breeze, pushed it across underground qanats, and funneled it into storage rooms. Cold air met colder walls. Moisture condensed and dripped silently into stone basins. What you end up with is a storage chamber that smells faintly of clay and mint and feels like walking into a cellar in the Alps. But here's a fun twist. Some historians believe yakchals may have doubled as food processors. There's emerging evidence that fruit like mulberries, plums, and even melon slices were frozen and dried here, not just stored. The debate's still simmering: were these seasonal pantries or full-blown ancient food labs? No one's entirely sure. But wouldn't it be perfect if your great-great-grandparents invented popsicles? 200 years ago. And that brings us to the banquets. Picture this: golden goblets, copper plates, perfumed rice, saffron stews, and a crowd of people reclining on thick carpets as a cool breeze dances across the courtyard. Just as the host raises a dish of faluda, a sweet semi-frozen noodle dessert that's still popular in Iran today, he explains that yes, it was chilled in the yakchal before dinner. It's the medieval Persian version of, "You have to try this, it's homemade." This blend of cooling and cuisine was deeply embedded in daily life. Some wealthy homes even had separate kitchens for summer and winter, carefully placed to match sun angles and airflow. Summer kitchens were often half underground and shaded by trees. Even ovens were adjusted seasonally. You didn't just cook food, you partnered with the climate. There's also a delightful tidbit from travelers' accounts. European diplomats and merchants who visited Persia in the 17th and 18th centuries were astounded by the presence of ice and chilled fruit in the desert. One Venetian trader reportedly wrote home that Persians had captured winter and kept it in a cone. Historians still argue whether this is poetic flourish or something he actually saw. Either way, it's a perfect little image: frozen seasons stored like treasure. And you can't leave this section without one last whisper of wonder: ice was shared. Some cities rationed it out to hospitals, markets, and even poor neighborhoods. It wasn't all status and luxury. It was infrastructure, survival, the idea that a community should be cooled together. So here you are, sitting cross-legged near the mouth of a yakchal, licking pomegranate syrup off your fingers, and watching the last rays of sun skip off its smooth dome. There's no sound but the quiet creak of air moving, the faint drip of condensation, and the occasional sigh of someone finally cool again. Not bad for a structure that's over 1,000 years old and made of mud. The sun hangs low over the clay skyline, and you're standing in the courtyard of a merchant's home. His robe shimmers with embroidered threads, and his windcatcher, oh, it's towering easily, twice the height of his neighbors. Welcome to the world where airflow became affluence. You probably thought cooling a house in the desert was just about staying alive. And sure, that's the baseline. But in the cities of ancient Persia, particularly in Yazd-Kashan and Bam, the height, complexity, and sheer ornamentation of a badger said a lot more about who you were than how hot you were. This isn't just engineering, it's social signaling with bricks. You're seated now on a clay bench with a jug of chilled water, thanks underground yakchal, and you watch servants stoke gentle breezes through painted ducts that catch the light like mosaic rainbows. The taller the tower, the stronger the breeze, and the more prestige it carried. Some windcatchers had multiple channels scooping from all 4 cardinal directions, like a kind of architectural octopus. Others were paired with domes that spun airflow, like a soft-spoken tornado, cooling entire wings of a home. Historians still argue whether the design evolved purely for climate control, or whether rivalry played just as big a role. After all, once one merchant figured out how to funnel the wind into his tea room, the next merchant had to raise his tower 6 bricks higher. You know how it goes. Here's a fringe fact for your evening. The tallest badger in Yazd, which still stands today, is nearly 34 meters, 34 meters high. That's more than 100 feet of hand-laid mud brick with carved cedar slats and blue-glazed tiles that shimmer in the twilight, all to channel a breeze into a basement where people drank sherbet and napped on floor cushions. And don't forget the auditory side of status. The whoosh of air wasn't just pleasant, it was performative. Visitors stepping into the courtyard would hear the hum of rushing wind and think, "Ah, this family has their life together." It's like today's version of walking into a home and hearing a $10,000 speaker system whispering ambient jazz. Some elite homes even combined windcatchers with pools placed precisely under the air shaft to maximize that crispness. A moist breeze was more effective and more expensive. It meant your water supply was plentiful enough to just sit there, evaporating gently. All for the luxury of comfort. Now let's talk rooftops. Wealthy homes featured rooftop terraces enclosed by decorative merlons, those tooth-like parapets, which weren't just pretty. They created micro-eddies of air and funneled the breeze downward. Some families even hosted dinners up there during summer months. Just imagine grilled lamb, pistachio rice, and cool night air spilling from your bespoke brick tower. But not all windcatchers were created equal. Lower-class homes often had short single-direction badgers, or none at all, maybe just slatted openings and shaded windows. So if you saw a multi-directional tower topped with colorful glazed tiles, it wasn't just smart architecture. That was swagger. Let's not forget the artisans. Crafting these wind towers wasn't a casual weekend job. Specialized masons called badger saz were hired to design airflow sculpt channels and often inscribe religious verses along the entry slats. Some even embedded small earthen pipes within the walls to help redirect air into precise zones like the sitting room or prayer niche. And those with real money. They paid for invisible upgrades like subterranean air tunnels that funneled the cooled wind under marble floors. Imagine your feet brushing across a chill that whispers up through the tiles. Again, no electricity, just pressure gravity and a lot of know-how. You notice something else, Shade. The best wind catchers weren't standing in the middle of a flat roof. They were built with strategic shade timing in mind. That meant aligning the tower's intake with the angle of the sun so that not even the hot morning light could sneak in and warm the ducts. And oh, the evening ritual. At dusk, servants climbed up narrow staircases inside the towers. Yes, some had hollow interiors and adjusted ceramic flaps or canvas screens to catch the shifting wind. You can almost hear the creak of ropes and the flutter of woven fabric as they fine-tuned the house like a musical instrument. Status, in other words, wasn't just what you wore, it was how your home breathed. You lean back imagining your own desert manor with 6 wind catchers, an underground ice chamber, and a fountain that sings. But of course, you'd need a few servants to climb up there every evening to change the breeze. The price of luxury. And while some scholars claim these towers were purely utilitarian, there's a quiet elegance in how they were used to host guests, cool sacred spaces, and impress in-laws. Let's be honest, no one wants to drink rosewater sherbet in a sweaty courtyard, but sip it beneath a 20-meter breeze funnel. Now that is hospitality. You stroll into a Persian city at dusk, just as the sandstone buildings begin to lose their heat, and the alleyways stretch long shadows across cobbled streets. The scent of cooked lentils, fresh herbs, and dusty stone fills the air, and you notice something peculiar. These cities aren't built in a straight line. Instead, they curve, they lean, they twist with intention. This isn't poor planning, it's air logic. Persian urban design, especially in desert regions like Yazd or Kashan, wasn't just about fitting homes between hills or avoiding flash floods. It was about engineering a lifestyle that could defy the heat. Streets were narrow and high-walled, not for drama, but for shade. The tighter the street, the less sun touched the ground, and the more likely a breeze might get trapped, funneled, and delivered like a little gift, right to your face. You'd be surprised how much a 5-degree drop in air temperature feels like a miracle after a scorched afternoon. You pass beneath a sabbat, one of those unexpected arched roofs that bridge two buildings across an alley. These weren't just adorable passageways, they were thermal strategy. A sabbat offers shade, yes, but more importantly, it interrupts vertical heating. The air beneath it cools, thickens, and moves slowly. And that's what you're walking through now, a soft, low-humming current of air that makes you forget your sandals are covered in dust. Now, look up. Windcatchers crown many of the homes here, their tall silhouettes breaking the horizon like chimneys from another universe. But here's the kicker. They're not placed randomly. Homes and even entire neighborhoods were aligned so that prevailing winds could pass cleanly through. This wasn't a passive process. Architects used wind charts. They studied the topography. They knew the slope of nearby hills, how walls reflected heat, and how trees, yes, even the placement of trees affected movement. Historians still argue whether these city plans emerged slowly through tradition or were the result of sophisticated pre-Islamic urban design philosophy. Peek into a home's open courtyard. It's probably sunken a bit, or at least built lower than street level. Why cool air pools? Like water, it flows downward. A lowered courtyard shaded and centered around a pool or garden became an internal wellspring of breeze. Add a wind catcher or two aimed at that courtyard, and the air practically swirls like it's doing a gentle dance routine. There's another subtle trick, staggered heights. Not all homes rise to the same level. Why so wind can move like a wave, cresting one rooftop and dropping into the next. Some upper rooms even had lattice brickwork, not for aesthetics, but so wind could creep in and warm air could crawl out. Even the doors cooperated. You might notice traditional Persian homes have two knockers, one for men, one for women. Yes, really. But also that doors open inward. That inward swing created a pressure difference when paired with the movement of air across open courtyards, helping to pull fresh wind in rather than blocking it. It's like they figured out the physics of breeze without the math headache. Let's step into the bazaar. Markets were often covered not just for shade, but to regulate internal climate. High vaults and openings along the roof created chimneys of warm air. As heat rose, cooler air was sucked in from lower street-level entrances. It created a kind of passive air circulation system that made haggling over dates and bolts of silk a little more bearable. And yes, there's more. You've probably noticed that many streets aren't just narrow but curved. Turns weren't always 90 degrees. Instead, they sloped softly like water channels, making it harder for wind to escape or sunlight to dominate. The effect gentler, more stable airflow. And maybe fewer sunburns. Want to hear something odd but charming? In some neighborhoods, a community elder or engineer of sorts would test new streets or homes by standing on rooftops during high summer. They'd sprinkle flour or ash into the air and watch how it moved. No computers, just intuition and dusty hands. If the flour drifted cleanly down into the alley below, it was a thumbs up. If it scattered chaotically or stalled, something needed tweaking. Of course not every home had a wind catcher. Not every merchant could afford an ice pit. But city design acted as the great equalizer. Even if your house didn't have the fanciest features, your neighborhood still danced to the same breeze-conscious rhythm. That's something modern cities could learn from, don't you think? And here's the twist: archaeologists are still debating just how early this kind of city-scale cooling appeared. Some believe it traces back to the Achaemenid Empire, possibly influenced by Mesopotamian models. Others argue it only flourished during the Islamic Golden Age, when geometry, astronomy, and architecture collided in beautiful harmony. Either way, these cities weren't accidents. They were built like lungs meant to breathe. And as you stand now in the hush of evening listening to the air move through palm fronds and past crumbling walls, you might wonder, was it cooler then? Or did people simply understand how to listen to the wind? You ease your way through the dusty courtyards of a Persian caravanserai, one of those roadside inns built for travelers and traders, the kind with wide stone walls and thick shadows that swallow the harsh afternoon sun. A copper merchant from Samarkand unrolls his mat in the shade. He has dates bolts of patterned cloth and something a little more precious in this sweltering heat, cool jars of water. And you wonder, how? Because here, under the unrelenting sky of the Iranian plateau, where summer temperatures regularly taunt the 100-degree mark, these ancient merchants weren't just selling spices. They were moving perishable goods, cheeses, silk dyed with delicate pigments, dried fruits that could spoil if left in the wrong corner. And yet, they managed to keep things cool without a single outlet or humming machine. The secret A-mix of windcatchers' underground storage, thick earthen walls, and a little something called sardabs. A sardab, which literally translates to cold water basement, was a subterranean chamber attached to qanats, those gently sloping underground channels you may remember from earlier. These spaces weren't just for storing water. They were carefully designed to trap and hold the coolest air. You descend into one, now ducking your head slightly as you follow the curved clay-plastered tunnel. It smells faintly of damp stone and pomegranate skins. The air is still and cold. It's not magic, it's physics. Cold air is denser than hot air, so it sinks. The badgers, or windcatchers, standing tall above ground, would channel even the faintest breeze down vertical shafts. When combined with a sardab, this created a gentle but constant loop. Hot air up, cool air down, no compressor required. And sometimes they'd throw in a shallow basin of water for extra cooling. Evaporative bliss. Merchants loved these chambers. They weren't just for preserving cheese and dates. Some stored wine if you were of the less strict sort. Others used them to cool scrolls of valuable parchment. One fringe theory suggests that even herbal medicines were preserved in these cellars, though historians still argue whether that was common practice or just a wealthy scholar's quirk. Now imagine a wedding dowry being prepared, a caravan filled with goods being readied for a noble bride. Her trousseau includes delicate perfume oils that mustn't overheat. That's where you'd see a custom-built cooling cart, a heavy wooden box with double clay linings, wet cloths tucked around the inner walls, and if the family was especially clever, a mini wind shaft sticking out the back, catching breezes as the cart trundled along. Is it a stretch? Maybe. But one merchant's notebook from the 11th century contains sketches suspiciously close to this. And don't forget the pantries on camels. Traders were experts in desert logistics. They'd ride with sealed clay vessels wrapped in wet felt or goat hair. The outer layer would evaporate under the sun, drawing heat from the inner jar. Inside butter yogurt, even small cuts of meat. It's like a Bedouin Yeti cooler, just without the branding. Over time, windcatchers weren't limited to stationary architecture. You'll even find mention of portable wind-directing screens in the court of the Buyid dynasty. Picture a finely carved wooden screen angled to direct wind onto the seated ruler as scribes fanned manuscripts dry behind him. Over-engineered, yes, but also a status symbol, because by now cooling had shifted from pure necessity to a form of quiet bragging. Copper fans engraved with quotes from Hafez, ice chests made of cedar cooled with imported snow from distant mountains. One 14th century sultan reportedly had a sardab chamber just for his hookah pipes, because a warm draw, he once said, sours the soul. Was that poetic exaggeration, or just a man too used to luxury? Historians still debate that one. But let's take a moment to appreciate how democratic this cooling system was. You didn't need wealth to benefit from it. Poorer families in Yazd or Kerman used shared qanats. Windcatchers sprouted from schools, mosques, and bakeries. Even humble bakeries had back rooms to let dough proof in cooler air. It was communal comfort, and so, whether you were transporting saffron by camel, sipping cool mint tea in a shaded courtyard, or laying in a sardab whispering poetry by lantern light, one truth remains. The ancient Persians didn't wait for electricity to beat the heat. They engineered the air itself. You wander through the quiet stone courtyards of a large Persian home shaded by tall walls and dotted with pomegranate trees, and you feel it, an invisible ribbon of cool air brushing past your cheek. It's coming from above. You tilt your head and notice the graceful silhouette of a windcatcher rising behind the house, directing air inward like a divine exhale. But this isn't just any part of the house. You're standing at the threshold of the Anderuni, the women's quarters. In Persian domestic architecture, especially during the later Islamic periods, homes were divided into two primary areas: the Bayruni, the public-facing section for male guests and business dealings, and the Anderuni, the private internal space reserved for the family, especially women. And here in the cool stillness of the Anderuni windcatchers took on more than just a functional role. They shaped the very experience of privacy, leisure, and gendered comfort. You step inside a summer room, the tailor with its latticed windows and deep cushions. The floor is cool to the touch, thanks to the airflow created by both the badger and a nearby qanat, as if the earth itself is breathing cold beneath your feet. The walls are thick, built from mud brick and adobe, engineered not only for insulation, but for silence. These were spaces designed to be serene, sacred, and softly removed from the male-dominated world outside. And yes, believe it or not, windcatchers were often oriented specifically to bring breeze into these female quarters first. Historians still debate whether this architectural favoritism toward the Anderuni was intentional for thermal benefit or simply a happy accident of spatial priority. But either way, women, especially of the upper classes, enjoyed some of the most comfortable rooms in the home during those blistering summer months. You ease further inside, brushing past a curtained doorway made from woven goat hair. You catch the faint scent of jasmine water, commonly poured into shallow clay basins that would evaporate slowly, cooling the room and perfuming it at once. Some of the more elaborate houses even used wet reed mats or porous ceramic jars in front of air vents to create evaporative cooling, which basically turned the breeze into a whispering mist. The women here didn't just live quietly behind walls. They lived in spaces meticulously adapted for sensory pleasure: cold fruit, soft light, gentle air. Conversations flowed slowly like water, and movement was minimal during the heat of the day. One historian described it as thermal seclusion married to spiritual detachment. And no, they weren't sitting around in silence. You hear laughter, now faint and melodic, drifting from a domed chamber further in. Someone is reciting poetry, Hafez, or Rumi perhaps. Someone else is embroidering under a skylight, the colored silks pooled like water in her lap. The breeze from the badger brushes their faces and stirs the embroidered curtain. In wealthier homes, the windcatchers even had rotating flaps, controlled by ropes that ran down to the floor, allowing the women themselves to shift the airflow as needed. Think of it as ancient climate control, except instead of a remote control, you're tugging on a bit of hemp string tied to the ceiling. Outside, the men in the Biruni are probably sweating through their negotiations, but back here, time is syrup slow and scented. You wonder if they even knew how good the air was in the back rooms. Another debate among scholars: were these spaces truly empowering sanctuaries or enforced isolations, cleverly gilded with breeze and beauty? There's no easy answer. For some women, the Anderuni was a protected realm of sisterhood creativity and control. For others, it may have felt like a velvet prison. The windcatchers cooled both the comforts and the contradictions of gendered space. Still, as you sit on the tiled bench beside a trickling fountain, you can't help but admit, if you're going to be enclosed, this isn't a bad place to do it. Especially when the windcatcher hums just right and the pomegranates cast dappled light across the floor. And maybe, just maybe, some clever woman centuries ago tugged her own airflow rope, turned her back to the breeze, and thought this world might be small, but at least it's cool. You step softly now into a courtyard, walled with clay brick and silence. The scent of sandalwood drifts from a brass burner. Behind the ochre walls, the sun still glares against the desert sky, but here in this shaded sanctuary of an ancient Persian home, the temperature has dropped. Not just by degrees, but by experience. The breeze is cooler here, gentler, reverent almost. And that's no accident. Because you're not just inside a house, you're inside a worldview. The ancient Persians didn't separate architecture from belief. The windcatcher badger wasn't just a machine for moving air. It was part of a much larger sacred balance shaped by Zoroastrian ideas that had floated across centuries and sand dunes. In Zoroastrianism, the four elements air, fire, water, and earth weren't just metaphors. They were literal forces of cosmic order. Fire symbolized truth. Water, purity. Air, it was breath itself, the bridge between the living world and the divine. So when you direct air across cool, flowing water in a sacred space, you're not just cooling your home. You're inviting harmony into it. Look around. The wind doesn't just blow through these towers randomly. The openings face in deliberate directions, often aligned to prevailing summer winds. Scholars believe this placement wasn't solely practical, it mirrored a spiritual order. Wind came from Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity, and its guidance through the home was both physical comfort and metaphysical grace. It's why you'll find badgers so often perched above water cisterns or sarb underground chambers, dug deep into the cool earth, housing sacred water, meant for both drinking and blessing. Here the water was untouched by sunlight, protected still. When the air was pulled across it and into the home, it wasn't just refreshing, it was spiritually cleansed. Historians still argue whether this dual purpose, practical and spiritual, was a design intention or a later interpretation. Some say Zoroastrian purity laws simply reinforced cooling practices already in use. Others insist the rituals shaped the architecture from the beginning. Either way, when you're inside one of these homes under the whisper of wind guided by centuries of belief, it doesn't really matter. You feel it. The peace. Let's not forget fire either. Fire temples were sacred sites for Zoroastrians, with eternal flames burning in inner chambers. Fire had to be kept clean shielded from impurity. That meant airflow had to be controlled with precision. In larger temples, badgers were often used to ventilate rooms without stirring up dust or threatening the sacred flame. That's right, some of the earliest HVAC engineers were also temple caretakers. One traveler in the 10th century, a bit sleep-deprived from his caravan ride, wrote that Persian temples were cool in body and cool in mind, which might sound like a dad joke now, but back then it meant something. In a world of extremes, desert heat, political shifts, religious changes, these were places of stillness made possible by physics and faith. Now let's shift our gaze to the women's quarters, known as the Anderuni, a space deeply shaped by tradition, gender roles, and yes, temperature. Windcatchers served these private areas as well, often through more indirect channels. In homes with multiple towers, the ones feeding into the Anderuni were positioned to create the softest, quietest airflow. Here, air wasn't meant to rush or swirl, it was meant to sigh. You can almost imagine it. Cushions arranged around a shaded fountain, the women sitting together beneath embroidered canopies, braiding each other's hair, or humming old poems. The wind catches the scent of rosewater from the pool, curls past hanging pomegranates, and disappears again into the waiting mouth of the badger. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's ever present, like breath, like prayer. That subtlety, the idea that wind itself could be tamed, softened, dignified, says something profound about Persian domestic life. You didn't have to fight nature. You could listen to it, redirect it, even partner with it. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. Some later Islamic scholars in the Abbasid era raised eyebrows at the use of wind catchers over sacred cisterns. Too secular, they warned. Others embraced them as blessings in disguise. As always, the architecture kept adapting, quietly evolving through dynasties and belief systems like a breeze shifting directions. One particularly curious example. In some Zoroastrian-influenced homes, the direction of wind catchers was altered slightly each year, an architectural ritual meant to reflect the idea of spiritual rebalancing. No one's entirely sure how common it was, but records from Yazd hint at this practice well into the 13th century. Almost like realigning your soul by nudging your roofline. And then there's the most subtle feature of all the way: light played into it. Many badgers were paired with small oculi or clear-story windows just beneath the towers. During the morning hours, shafts of golden light would strike the cool water below, creating a shimmer that danced through the rising air currents. It didn't cool the room much more, but it made the coolness visible. Sacred, made sensible. You're lying back now, still within that quiet courtyard, the filtered air brushing your skin like the edge of silk. Not too cold, never forced, just balanced. Maybe that's what the Persians understood best of all. Cooling a space wasn't about defeating heat. It was about designing calm layer by layer, brick by brick, breeze by breeze. You leave the sun-baked courtyards of Yazd behind and drift across borders tracing the slender shadow of a tall wind catcher. The idea catching wind high up and channeling it downward was too good to stay confined to one empire. You start to notice similar towers popping up in places where the Persians never ruled directly. Funny thing about good ideas, they travel. Your first stop is Cairo. The breeze is drier here, the stone heavier, but those rooftop notches, mashrabiyas, they're called, look familiar. They're the Egyptian version of wind catchers called malkaf. and they rise like chimney stacks above the dust of Fatimid-era mansions. They don't just catch the breeze, they mix it with cooler air rising from internal courtyards and underground cisterns. A sort of passive air blender. You run your fingers along sandstone worn smooth by centuries. The technique is nearly identical. Historians still argue whether malkafs were imported via Persian merchants or developed independently by Arab engineers solving the same hot problem. Either way, the resemblance is uncanny and the timing suspiciously close to Persian trade influence in the region. Maybe a traveling mason shared more than just caravan gossip. Next, you hop east to Mughal India, where the Indo-Persian aesthetic ruled architecture like a velvet scepter. Here, windcatchers evolved into more ornate structures, arched screens carved from red sandstone domes with hidden ducts, jarokas, that filtered air through intricate jali screens. You lean into a marble lattice in a palace in Fatehpur Sikri. The breeze hisses through like a quiet whisper, carrying hints of mango and dust. Even when it's 100 degrees outside, the shaded rooms stay oddly cool. There's no humming of motors, no dripping AC. Just geometry doing its thing. One particular emperor, Shah Jahan, yes, the Taj Mahal guy, allegedly ordered the construction of special cooling towers on palace grounds. They don't look exactly like Persian badgirs, but they function in much the same way they rise above the complex, to invite in the higher altitude winds and funnel them downward into the spaces below, often over fountains or pools. And because this was the Mughals, they made it look good. Like really, really good. White marble inlaid jade peacocks carved in stone. You almost forget you're looking at HVAC. Then there's Venice. Yes, Venice. You weren't expecting that one, were you? The Doge's palace doesn't have windcatchers, not exactly, but some early Renaissance designs hint at an awareness of the Persian trick. Narrow alleyways align with lagoon breezes, and several 14th century buildings experimented with rooftop scoops. Not enough to be called a full badger, but definitely more than a fluke. Why? Because the Venetians, clever little traders they were, had a direct trade pipeline to the Islamic world, especially the Mamluks and the Ottomans. They bought more than just spices and silks. They brought back architectural ideas too. Airflow wasn't just about comfort. It was about preserving tapestries, papers, manuscripts, goods. And Venetian merchants were nothing if not pragmatic. Plus, who doesn't love a breeze when you're draped in layers of brocade? In parts of East Africa, notably on the Swahili coast, some old coral stone homes feature similar venting shafts. Again, no written record ties them directly to Persia, but given the dense maritime trade across the Indian Ocean, it's entirely possible the idea arrived via dhow, along with dates, carved doors, and Persian poetry. You find a pattern. Good ideas are like rivers. They flow downhill, meandering into cultures, merging with local needs, shaped by climate faith and fashion. The windcatcher was never patented. It just worked, and so it wandered, adopted by people who never spoke. Old Persian never bowed to a shah, but still needed to nap in July. And there's something else. Once you start seeing these towers, you realize they're all tuned to their surroundings. In Egypt, they're taller and narrower, better for the dry desert gusts. In India, they're integrated into larger complexes with gardens and pools. In the Gulf, they're simpler, often just open shafts in merchant homes, channeling breeze over ceramic jars of water. Each version is a local remix of the same melody, Wind Coolness Rest. Historians also debate how much of this innovation was led by engineers versus artisans. Was it the court architects who spread the word, Or the anonymous builders with dusty sandals and quiet genius? You'll never know their names, but you can feel their legacy each time a breeze filters through a carved stone screen and makes you forget you're sweating. Funny, isn't it? The modern world spent a century chasing electric cooling, and yet the ancients were already solving 90% of the problem with mud shade and a well-placed hole in the roof. If there's one thing you've learned by now, it's this: history doesn't just repeat itself, it often outsmarts us. You return to Yazd in your mind, to those elegant towers slicing the sky. They're not unique anymore. They're part of a quiet, cross-continental conversation that spanned centuries. A whisper that says, "Stay cool." Someone's thought of this before. You lean into the wind, what little there is, feeling it brush past your face, warm and dry like a sigh from the earth itself. But you're not in ancient Yazd anymore. You're standing in a 19th century European lecture hall, crammed between scholars in itchy wool coats, all murmuring in languages that sound like someone trying to clear their throat politely. At the front on a chalkboard is a diagram of a Persian badger. Arrows point to airflow patterns. One man jots notes in Latin, another sketches the same shape in the corner of a leather-bound notebook, his monocle glinting. Because yes, during the feverish colonial expansions of the 18th and 19th centuries, European architects, engineers, and amateur orientalists grew weirdly obsessed with Persian windcatchers. They studied them, mapped them, measured them. French, British, and German envoys brought home sketches whispered about desert air conditioning and argued over whether the design came from divine geometry or just a lucky accident. Historians still debate whether these colonial visitors genuinely understood the brilliance of the system or merely romanticized it, much like how people today admire bonsai trees without knowing they require decades of patient snipping. Some Europeans thought the windcatcher was a novelty, others a relic. A few genuinely tried to copy it. There are records of badger-inspired ventilation shafts installed in British colonial buildings in India, and even in a few 19th century Egyptian train stations. Spoiler: the versions without qanats rarely worked as well. There's a slightly ridiculous account of an early American inventor who believed he could build a wind tower in Arizona based on the Yazdi model. But instead of adobe, he used white-painted metal and forgot about the whole thermodynamics part. The result: a very expensive sun-baked chimney. Congratulations, sir. You made a slow cooker. Still, the idea stuck in architectural circles. You might be surprised to know that Frank Lloyd Wright once cited desert ventilation principles in his early notes, though whether he meant Persia or New Mexico is up for debate. It's one of those vague footnotes that makes historians mutter "sip tea" and raise one eyebrow. Back in Persia, meanwhile, things were changing. As oil wealth trickled in and Western modernism took hold, air conditioners began arriving in boxes stamped General Electric. Suddenly, the ancient towers that had hummed above cities for centuries were viewed as quaint, outdated, an eyesore. Some were torn down. Others were capped off or left to crumble. You can almost hear them sigh like someone being dismissed at a meeting they once led. And yet some resisted the tide, especially in Yazd, where the towers had always been more than just ventilation. They were memory, culture, the skyline itself. A few local families refused to replace their badgers. Some artisans quietly kept the repair skills alive, passing them down like recipes. Others lobbied for historic protections. By the late 20th century, with climate change elbowing its way into every conversation, architectural thinkers started to whisper a new word: passive. Passive cooling. Passive design. You smirk. Ancient Persia would like a word. A few modern architects began to revisit those dusty sketches from colonial notebooks, this time with respect. In Dubai, some shopping malls now feature glass and steel versions of windcatchers, not as decoration, but as functioning airflow guides. In London, the wind tower made a cheeky comeback in eco-conscious housing. In California, an experimental school features a wind-catcher-shaped atrium. The irony, they all had to go back to the oldest source for reference, Yazd. Some architects now travel there not as conquerors, but students. They measure angles with smartphones. They take drone footage. They ask questions. And this time the local experts answer quietly proud, because the wind never stopped. Only people stopped listening. One fringe tidbit that keeps surfacing. Some badgers have been found with whistling grooves carved along the interior. Their purpose is still unclear. Ventilation communication, a musical flourish by a show-off bricklayer. Historians still argue whether it was intentional or just a fluke of erosion, but the idea of a softly singing windcatcher is poetic enough to stay in the lore. You trace a finger along the stone, real or imagined, and feel the faded pride embedded in its shape. This wasn't just a design. It was a worldview, a belief that you could live with the wind, not against it. That silence and shade were more luxurious than marble and gold. That knowledge wasn't always loud, but it endured. And even when modernity forgot them, those towers stood still, tall, cracked, and dignified, waiting. You're back in Yazd. It's late evening now. The call to prayer has long since echoed off the clay walls, and the market has quieted to a rustle. The smell of cardamom tea and brick dust floats lazily through the alleyways, blending with the night air, like the final notes of a lullaby. You walk slowly, your sandals brushing softly over ancient flagstones, still warm from the sun. But the heat has shifted. It's no longer pressing against your chest. It's been replaced by something older, gentler, and wiser, the breeze. Above you, the silhouettes of windcatchers rise like sleepy sentinels. They've been here for hundreds of years. Some are chipped. Others lean ever so slightly, as if tired from holding centuries of sky. But tonight, they're wide awake. The desert air has cooled, slipping in through the windcatchers' open mouths and sliding down into the homes below like a sigh. It brushes across marble floors and into sunken basements, where it lingers like a careful guest. You duck into one courtyard, and someone has lit a single lamp. Not electric, just oil. Its flame flickers, then steadies, just like the wind that slips past it without disturbing the peace. Somewhere behind a screen, a woman sings an old lullaby. You can't mook out the words, but you understand the intention. Soft, cyclical, timeless. This house is still alive. The badger above still draws in the air, the qanat below still whispers beneath the floor, and the family in between lives in a pocket of tradition, stitched by water wind and patient design. Historians still debate whether the revival of windcatchers is a serious architectural solution or just nostalgic tourism. But here now in this courtyard, theory means little. The cool air is real, the quiet is generous, and nobody's reaching for a thermostat. You lean back on a cushion hand resting against the worn surface of a mud brick wall. Its texture is warm, but its heart is cool. Like this city. Like this night. There's a rooftop in Yazd, flat open, framed by 4 badgers like watchful grandparents. You're lying there now. The stars have taken their posts. The breeze loops through the towers in slow, practiced movements, brushing your hair. your fingertips, your dreams. No walls buzz with machines. No air ducts rattle. Just gravity pressure and patience. If you listen closely, you might hear the windcatcher breathing for you. And now it's time to let go. The air thickens with stillness, then softens again. You feel it all slowing your thoughts, your chest, even the city. Around you, Yazd slumbers. Its towers whisper secrets into the night. And far from the blinking lights of the modern world, somewhere between sky and sand, you drift.